Welcome back to the Pittsburgh Sports Cast, where two college kids discuss all things Pittsburgh sports all year round. I'm Ryan,
And I'm Chris.
and today we will be discussing the NHL season. This is the second episode of the Pittsburgh Sports Cast. We hope you could check out our last episode where we discussed the Steelers and the rest of the AFC North's NFL draft. And we also had a bit of a discussion on the complicated backup quarterback situation in Pittsburgh. But today we'll be discussing all things Penguins and NHL. Are you ready, Chris?
I am.
All right. So, first on the agenda, the actual NHL season itself. Of course, there are many questions that are left to be answered. Of course, the mere fact of, do we have a season to resume? Will we get names on the cup this year? And before we get into this debate, guys, I just want to preface this. We're not medical professionals. We're not doctors, nurses, epidemiologists, anything like that. This is all just fan speculation. So don't take any of our discussions as letter of the law. We're just a couple college kids talking Pittsburgh sports in a time where there are none. So bear with us, please. But back with it. It appears that the team facilities are going to open on a state-by-state basis. Uh, Obviously, here in Pennsylvania, we're still, or at least this region, as well as Philadelphia, are still in the red phase. Um, I do believe Tom Wolf said sports can't resume practices and such until green. Is it? Is that right?
I believe so.
So we still got a bit of time before we are able to even resume practices and whatnot. So, but that's not just the case in Pennsylvania. That's the case all across the country. And that is, I think, one of the biggest obstacles to leap, the fact that some teams might be practicing like that while others still haven't had cases led up to the point where they are able to get going again.
Well, see, here's some issues, right? Because you're right. Some states are going to go on green and yellow just quicker before other states can get to that point. Now, when you're talking sports, that's NHL, NBA, NFL, and MLB. It's difficult because since we're such a big country, our sports teams and all the leagues are scattered across the country. So let's say, PA's lifted to green, but California isn't. So what are you going to do? Are you just not going to let the California teams play? Are you not going to have them in your league because you want to get the league going and the majority of the teams in your league can go and can play, but like the state of California can't? Do you try to move the California teams to like, Arizona or Nevada, Washington even, to, have them play games in a different state, a state that may be green, opposed to, being locked down in California? I think the same will go for New York, 'cause I think those two states will be in the red the longest, but those two states have a ton of sports teams, and especially since this discussion's about hockey, let's think of the teams in those two states. You had the Rangers and the Islanders and the Sabres in New York. So you have three teams in New York, and then in Cal you have San Jose, you have LA, you have Anaheim. So that's another three right there. So even for the NHL to even continue, if those two states are on red, those are six teams that are going to miss. Now, granted, if they just do the whole concept of jump right into the playoffs, they might be able to do it because none of the California teams are going to make it, and I don't believe any of the New York teams are going to make it as well. So if they just wanted to jump straight in, I guess you could do it. But the issue is trying to get all 50, not even, you don't need all 50 states. You need all the states with teams in them. And Canada, don't forget. Which, since we're talking about the NHL, there's what, 7, 8 teams in Canada.
Yeah.
And I don't know what's going on in Canada because I'm not Canadian, obviously. So I don't know what these things going up in Canada are. Are they beginning to ease restrictions? Are they still all in red? What's their, reopening plan supposed to be? Is it going to match the US? Is it going to be different? Are they going to be open sooner than the US? Or are they going to be open later than the US? I mean, these are all things that the NHL really need to consider before trying to set some type of deadline of, when they can get playing back.
Yes. And the longer this goes, uh, the bigger question of how many games do you sacrifice? We've we don't know if they're gonna finish the regular season out. That seems more and more unlikely as the days and weeks go by. Um, we don't know even if they'll have to or if they'll consider canceling or shortening next season just to finish this season. And I think that's another question the NHL is going to have to answer. How much do we value putting names on the cup this season if it means we have to shorten the next season? Is having a championship worth it? Or do you want to have a full 82 game schedule next year?
See, and you're right, and they do have to answer that question. But something I was thinking about earlier today was if they like scratch the season completely and there's no championship awarded and there's no playoffs, it's going to be a huge, I think, PR disaster for them. Um, because if we compare the NHL to like the European soccer leagues, and some of the European soccer leagues have declared winners, Champion League spots, and relegation zones, right? It's easier to do that over there because they don't have playoffs, right? It's just a regular season and they're done. Um, except for some of the side competitions. But over here in North America, it's not how it works. Our regular season is only to see if you make the playoffs or not. The playoffs are what make American sports. And for any league, and that goes for the NHL or NBA, to say no playoffs, I think would be a huge PR disaster. Because not only did you waste a season in players' primes, because you did, think about the veterans who said maybe I only have one more year left, and this was their last year. Think of someone on the Penguins, Patrick Marleau, right? Patrick Marleau, is at the end of his career, probably his last season, got traded from San Jose to Pittsburgh in hopes of winning a Stanley Cup, right? So if you tell Patrick Marleau and you say, hey, um, yeah, we're going to cancel the season, you know, will a team want him again? Will the Penguins, sign him again? Will another contender sign him for the opportunity to win a Stanley Cup? Or was his realistic last chance taken away from him? And, to try to post that in like a PR type of way, I just don't think fans are going to react well. I think there's going to be uproar that they can't see their teams in the playoffs. There's going to be uproar for the veterans who, may have only had one more chance at the Stanley Cup and they don't get that opportunity. I think the fans will be upset about that. And I think the players will be upset about that. And think of a team like Tampa Bay, who you and I were kind of talking off podcast, a team that, a lot of the players are in the last year of the contract, their salary cap struck. They don't have a lot of picks because they traded them away to bring people in to make a really last run at the Stanley Cup, right? What are you going to tell them? Oh, sorry, we know you're not going to be able to sign a lot of your players, and we know you don't have any draft picks because you traded them away trying to win the Stanley Cup this year, but sorry, no Stanley Cup. Like, And then the Tampa Bay Lightning fans going back to the PR thing's going to be ticked off. And then the Lightning players, the Lightning organization, the Lightning GM, the Lightning head coach are all going to be frustrated because people will be losing their jobs, right? If the Tampa Bay Lightning salary cap struck, they can't sign a whole lot of players. They're going to lose players. They don't have a lot of draft picks, and they have an off year next year. A GM could be fired, the coach could be fired, assistant coaches could be fired, right? And legitimate jobs are on the line here. So I don't know how the NHL could feasibly not do playoffs because so much is at stake within organizations and PR. Because we have to remember also the NHL is probably the smallest out of the four sports, so PR is really important to them, whereas maybe in the NFL it isn't.
Yeah, that's true. Plus, I think another thing the NHL has to consider is they know the feeling of having their playoffs canceled relatively recently. Uh, Obviously, it was the entire 04-05 season due to the infamous lockout. And I do agree with you that they they should try to finish this season, at least to finish the playoffs at any and all cost, even if it means shortening playoff series, even if it means shortening next season. You have to get the names on the cup for the sake of the players, for the sake of the teams, and most importantly, for the sake of the fans.
How would you like to see the NHL try to implement playoffs in the regular season?
Well, uh, obviously, the best case scenario is just picking up where they left off. But again, the more days pass without even so much as a formal proposal, the less likely that becomes. I just don't see the regular season resuming. Um, I see them moving straight forward to the Stanley Cup playoffs. Um, Hopefully, they can have best of seven series each round, but they might have to shorten the first round or two to accommodate for various reasons. And obviously, all this would be done without any fans in arenas.
See, here's my concern, right, with abandoning the regular season. Because I agree with you to an extent that that's probably where the NHL is going to go. But here's where I think things get complicated. So let's say you axe the regular season. I think if we're going on the Penguins, because this is a Pittsburgh biased sports cast, I think they had about 12 games remaining.
I think it was
Um,
11.
we had 11. Okay, so we had 11 games remaining. The Realistically, the teams are going to be off 2 to 3 months before they're going to be able to play competitive hockey again. And let's say that competitive hockey is playoff hockey. Now you have to decide, A, the first couple games are going to be trash for both teams because neither one has played a game of hockey in 2.5 months. You know what I'm saying? So it's not like it's going to be crisp playoff hockey. It's going to be, rough. It's going to be ugly. The players are going to have to figure out how to pass to one another again, how to skate properly again, because I don't know if they've been skating, right? Because I know a lot of ice rinks have been shut down. So I think that's going to be an issue. And two, if you shorten the playoffs, even if it's for the first couple rounds, let's say the first round's 5 games. Okay, it's going to take 2 to 3 games for the teams to get back. And realistically, you can lose a 5-game series, you can lose in 3 games. So a team, let's just take the Washington Capitals, who are leading the Metropolitan Division. So whomever they play, they could lose in 3 games, not because they're the worst team, not because they even played bad, but because they were rusty. And now their entire season's shot. That's why I don't know how feasible it would be. But for me, give them at least 3 to 4 regular season games to get back in some type of rhythm before playoffs.
Or maybe you could have some sort of exhibition games. Obviously, you'd have quite a few weeks of training, like almost like a makeshift training camp to get the players back up to speed. So that wouldn't be as much of an issue, but there are certain obviously in-game aspects that you can't replicate in a training camp. And despite all this, the players would obviously be a little rusty. And while yes, I that would be ideal to have a few regular season games and just before the playoffs start, I just don't see it happening when you look at the logistics of how much time uh, we have in terms of um, you have to, do all the formalities. You have to let the teams know when they're able to open. Plus, there's also this degree of fairness because um, some teams can go back sooner than others because, as we already said, it's all on a state by state basis. Once your state reopens, then your team can go back to practicing. So there's also that bit of unfairness. Uh, like the Penguins, let's say Pittsburgh goes up to yellow, but then or Pittsburgh goes up to green, and then Washington, stays in red, or Philadelphia stays in red. Uh, so no matter what proposal or no matter what the fix is, there's going to be some element of unfairness. And I think the key is you just try to please as many people as possible. Obviously, you can't make everybody happy, but um, I do kind of see where your proposal is coming from, but it might not be possible. If it were, I'd love it.
So then, with your proposal, they would have to play the playoffs like normal to give everyone the best chance, right? Like, I don't know how you could not play any regular season games and then go to like a 5 game series.
Uh, that's not the ideal, but of course, nothing done in these times is ideal. But you at this point, you just have to make do with the situation that you've been given and the cards you've been dealt. And if that means shortening series to 5 games and having no more regular season games, then so be it. I don't like it either. I hate it as much as you, Chris, but that might be a fact of life in 2020.
Are these rumors? Because I don't think anything's been stated by the NHL officially, correct?
No, and that makes it more complicated because they haven't even come out with anything. The NFL, at least, is planning on distributing their schedule tomorrow. And uh, there's been various MLB rumors, and the teams have been communicating with the MLB front offices. But with the NHL, there's a bit less that you hear. Even the NBA is coming back May 8th. I do believe is the NHL also for states that reopened.
Um, I am unsure actually. That's the first time I'm hearing anything about the NBA.
That's been in the news, I think, maybe the last week or so. But
Weird. Oh, I do recall hearing that. Yeah. I don't know, man. Uh,
yeah, it's all again. This is all speculative. You
right.
know, we uh, obviously know that the sports leagues, specifically the NHL, won't make any decisions and without consulting various medical professionals as well as make sure that they are okayed by lawmakers to resume activities. Hopefully, we reach a satisfying conclusion to the season.
Yeah.
Uh, But at this point, it's only hope.
Well, not to mention that, they're gonna be losing a ton of money.
Who
Um,
isn't?
True, but I mean, because playoffs is where these leagues make a lot of their money with the TV ratings, because that's where the majority of people tune in. Is to watch not even only their team, but other teams. See how playoffs are doing around the league. So if they don't have playoffs, they're losing a ton of money. When they're already losing a ton of money, let's be real, you're right. And especially even though realistically the playoffs are going to be without fans, so the teams are going to be losing that revenue. Let me ask you this question. How do you think the suspension for the league is going to reflect on the salary cap? Or how do you think it's going to affect the salary cap?
That is a very good question. Uh, the league will have to check out budgeting and check see how much they have lost, and that could be a concern. Um, we could, I mean, we've already seen. I haven't heard anything about NHL executives taking pay cuts, but we've seen that in other leagues in order to cut costs. Uh, an issue that the players' union could fight is cutting player salaries, possibly. Obviously, you don't want to do that, and then then the issue of work stoppages becomes a concern. If you have to meddle with players' salaries or lower the cap, um, at the same time, the owners might be fed up if the cap is raised or stays where it is or doesn't lower enough. So there's a whole nother can of worms that is opened when you talk about financials and how that impacts spending and team budgeting.
And I think it's an important discussion to have, because imagine trying to be a GM in this time where you're trying to, build a team for next year, look at your free agents, look at the free agents who are available, right? And it's complicated because you don't know necessarily how much money you're going to have to spend. Um, and even if you're a player who's hitting free agent thinking you're going to have a big payday, that payday may not come because teams just may not have the money that they thought they were going to because they missed, a quarter of their season plus the playoffs at the moment.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
and that adds to the whole unfairness aspect of it. Not only the players who signed for teams this season hoping to win a Stanley Cup, but also the players whose contracts expire, uh, expecting a big payout, and now they might not get that.
It's crazy. It's it's weird because we haven't seen anything like this, right? So it's hard, and I like how you keep saying the word speculation, because this is all it is. Because we've never encountered anything like this. And really, realistically, in the history of sports, you know? The only league that's really not affected by this is the NFL.
Yet.
Because this will probably be taken care of by the time the NFL season kicks off.
Well,
Um,
that's the hope, obviously.
yeah, but and then you even have like issues like such as the draft. When do you draft? How do you decide the draft order? Um, you know,
Yes,
uh,
because the NHL has been in discussion with moving up the draft to take place. Uh, I don't know if moving it up, but having the draft take place as scheduled, and then you have that added dynamic of drafted players possibly joining teams before the end of the season, should it resume.
I, I mean, in theory that could happen. But I feel like a lot of players who are ready to play um are, the team or with teams who aren't going to make the playoffs.
Yeah, that's true. Early round draft picks, unless a team were to say, but what if you were a playoff team, and what if you knew the season wasn't going to resume and they were just going to go straight to the playoffs? What if you were a playoff team and you wanted to trade up to get that extra piece?
You could, 1,000% you could. And see, this is where things get so complicated and in this weird gray area, right?
There's, I know that's this whole extra layer of duplicity.
And like, so what free agency happens July 1st? We're still about 2 months away from that. But will players then? Because that's another thing, right? Because let's say playoffs are going to have to go beyond July 1st, no matter how
Definitely.
you look at it,
How are
right?
they going to
So
work that?
players' contracts run out July 1st. So a lot of those free agents, are done, are going to
Can
be
you
playing for
imagine the
free.
chaos if they let them become free agents?
Right. I mean, do you still allow July 1st to happen and just let free agents roam around, even though they may be playing a playoff game? Um, what do you do? Because that July 1st deadline, much like the June 30th, June
Yeah, that's a
30th,
binding contract that was signed by the player, you know, years before knowing that anything like this was about to happen.
right? So are the players going to be willing to play for free? Are, are the GMs going to try to restructure and extend them for like 3 months or a month, however long this playoff run may last?
Yeah.
Um, I think the July 1st deadline's something that's weird to think about as well because of like the free agency and things that go along with that.
Yes, there certainly way too many aspects of points of discussion that could be brought on. We could continue for another 5 hours, I'm sure, on the various scenarios that are inevitably going to pop up if and hopefully when the season resumes. Um, but speaking of resumption of the season, let's take a minute and let's just imagine that the regular season is over, that the NHL decides to resume and go right into the playoffs because um, the playoff picture, we went on ESPN.com, and this was the playoff picture. So if the regular season is indeed over, here's what the playoff matchups are going to look like. We'll start out, of course, in the East. Uh, the Atlantic number one seed Boston Bruins are gonna would be taking on the second wild card Columbus Blue Jackets out of the Metropolitan Division. They'd be crossing over into the Atlantic for their half of the East bracket. And then in the 2-3 matchup, the Lightning will be taking on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Would you say that's a bit of a surprise? Of course, the Lightning did go down last season in the first round, but uh, any thoughts on who do you think would come out of there into the East final?
I think it's going to be Boston or Tampa. I Boston was playing really well. Tampa and Toronto play very similar games. It's a very up and down game, kind of like the Penguins. But Tampa Bay just does it better. Tampa Bay has better goaltending. Tampa Bay has better defense. Tampa Bay has better offense. So, all around, Tampa Bay is a better team. But we have to remember, like you said, they got swept as the best regular season team of all time by Columbus, right? So Tampa Bay has choked. They have a history of choking. Um, so I think Tampa had to put that, red flag with, they had to do it before, we can really say that they're excellent. But also, I'll go Boston just because Boston's been there, done that. They made the Cup final last year.
Yeah, I
Oh,
agree with you. Boston Tampa seems like a likely second round matchup from the Atlantic half of the East bracket. Uh, frankly, I think Boston's just I think Boston's just too good, as well as Tampa's history of choking in the playoffs. I mean, we talked about last year, years past. Uh, the most recent success, of course, the 2015 final and making the East final against us in 16. They took us to Game 7. Um, so I'm taking Boston out of this half of the bracket. And then moving on to the Metropolitan Division, uh, the number one seed are, of course, the Washington Capitals, who just edged out Philadelphia. We'll get to later. And they'll be taking on the first wild card, Carolina. And then in the 2-3 matchup, of course, how many times have these two teams met in the playoffs this century?
hmm.
The Flyers, the number two seed against your Pittsburgh Penguins, number three seed in the Metro. Chris, your thoughts? Who is going to come out of this half to the East Final?
Dude, God only knows at this point, man.
Yeah.
Um, it's it's weird. It's weird, right? Because Philly was hot, right? They were smoking hot. They're gonna be off 2.5 months. That's gonna cool you off. I don't care, what team you played for or how hard you were. Being off 2.5 months is gonna cool you down. And then for the Penguins' perspective, we're gonna be healthy. The Penguins haven't been healthy since flipping game 1 this year. We've
Yes.
missed so many man games.
The
And we're gonna
Pens
be
are one of the
healthy.
teams that benefit from the stoppage because Jake Gensel, of course, will be back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Who was I think our leading scorer, if I'm not mistaken, before he got injured. So we're gonna get our leading scorer back. We're gonna get healthy. Yes, Philly was hot, and they're gonna have home ice. But I think I gotta go Pittsburgh. I think I gotta go
Yeah.
Penguins here. I think we're gonna be healthy. The Flyers are gonna cool off, and that's the only reason the Flyers pass us because they won like 10 in a row, right? Um, and so that's gonna be null and void because they're gonna be off for so long. And I think the Penguins are a little bit more mature, a little bit more experienced, kind of been there, done that. So I would take the Penguins. I think you gotta go with the Capitals. As much as I don't want to say it, I think Carolina could push them, but I think Caps would win it. Then be Pens versus Caps. I
Again, that
again
bodes
because
that bodes well. If you disregard 2018,
yeah, you're right, and I think the 2018 loss was realistically we had won back-to-back cups. We were tired. We were beaten up, and remember we were a Tom Kuhnhackl post away from tying that game and sending it into overtime. Um, because he hit the post on like I think a right wing shot, and it beat Holtby but hit the post and out. So that goes post and in. It's a different ball game. Maybe we go game 6, game 7. You know, and ultimately take it. So even that, the 2018 series can be chalked up to just being tied and some bad luck. So yeah, I think if it goes Pens Caps, I think historically the edge has been with the Pittsburgh Penguins. So I'll pick Pittsburgh Penguins and have a Pittsburgh Penguins Boston Bruins Stanley Cup final.
or Eastern Conference Final.
Mm. Yes, Eastern Conference final. My bad.
Yeah, I think it mainly comes down to which Penguins team will we see, because this team was all came out with guns ablazing. Everyone had written them off after they had lost Sid. Sid went down. Everyone completely discredited the team. Gino was also out. And yet this team came without arguably the best player in the world and were arguably the best team in hockey. Then Sid comes back, Gino comes back, some of our other players come back, and we kind of cool off, which was Uh, really frustrating to watch at times. We were making careless mistakes, turnovers in our own zone, bad goalie positioning. It was really frustrating to see our team get healthier and yet regress. So I think if the team can put together the performance that they had pre or while Crosby was hurt with adding in the star players that will all be back by the time the season would resume in this hypothetical scenario, uh, I I think, and obviously I'm being biased here. I think we can pull it off. I think we can take down the Flyers, and then use that momentum and take down OV and the Caps yet again.
Yeah, the thing that's going against us in the Flyer series is that we're going to be on the road. Um, and that always kind of sucks, but I think we can pull it off.
Well, keep in mind, being on the road isn't as influential if there's no fans.
That's a good point. I keep forgetting about that. There won't be fans, so home ice really is going to mean a whole bunch, except you sleep in a hotel.
Yes, plus there's that additional question of will there even be a home ice? Will they do neutral venues or, you know? But
True.
that's all speculative and we don't know. This whole thing is a hypothetical situation, of course.
Right.
All right. So, that being said, Penguins, Bruins in the East. Do you think the Pens can take down Boston and head to the final?
I do not. I think Boston's just been a team that's always had our number. Um, because of what the last time we met in the Eastern Conference Finals, they swept us. Even in the regular season, they just seem to be a team that can like consistently beat us when very few can. Um, so I think Boston would probably come out.
Yeah, I had to agree with you there. They've also been playing in the Atlantic Division, which um, is a bit more stacked, I think. Obviously, you have Washington, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, but the Lightning have been solid all year round. They've had to deal with that. The Bruins, of course, have accumulated more points than us, so uh, they would have home ice. That advantage, of course, might be negligible, but take for it what you will. So yeah, I'd have to say Boston going through to the Stanley Cup final, unfortunately for us.
I would agree, but that could change depending on health and how teams play coming out. But who knows?
Who knows? All right, now we move on to the Western Conference. We'll start out in the central side of things. The number one seed Blues of St. Louis, the defending Stanley Cup champion St. Louis Blues. And they'll be taking on the second wild card, the Nashville Predators. Um, and then in the 2-3 matchup, it'll be the Colorado Avalanche, the former Quebec Nordiques, taking on the former Minnesota North Stars, but now just the Dallas Stars. Chris, who do you like out of the central half of the Western bracket?
I think St. Louis wins easily. Um, at least their first series, St. Louis wins easily. That Dallas Colorado series is going to be. I can't wait to watch that series. Two uber talented teams, two teams playing really well. I know in Colorado you got the Nathan McKinnon, Landeskog line with Mika Ratnan. Um, that huge that new defensive stalwart. I think Cameron Keller. Um, Dallas, like I said, they have Sagan, they have Ben, they have Pavelski. Though Pavelski's old, but still can contribute. They have great goaltending, great defense. I think I'm gonna go with Colorado in that series. I think Colorado has a little bit more offense than Dallas does, and then in Colorado St. Louis, I think you gotta go St. Louis.
Oh yeah, no doubt about it. Nashville, St. Louis, gotta go with the Blues as Gloria rings through the empty arena and St. Louis homes everywhere. Uh, I agree with you. That Avstar series, it would be fun to watch, certainly. Uh, I have to go with Colorado as well. Uh, moving through to the Pacific half of the Western Conference playoff bracket, we've got the one seed Vegas Golden Knights. They would be taking on the Winnipeg Jets. And then in the 2-3 matchup, the Edmonton Oilers will be taking on the Calgary Flames.
Ooh, those are some great matchups.
I know.
Um, I think Vegas goes on, wins their series. I think Winnipeg just doesn't have enough defense and not enough consistent goaltending for whether it be a 5 or 7 game series. I just don't think they have enough to compete with Vegas. I think Vegas wins. Um, that again, the Flames Oilers series both have a lot of talented offense. Both goaltending suspect. Both
Yeah, it'd
teams
be a lot of that
very
might be an
suspect.
80s era style series. You might have some
I think
5-4, 7-6-5 games.
Yeah. I mean, Oilers obviously have Connor McDavid, who rivals Sidney Crosby for the best player in the league. They have Leon Draisaitl, who's blowing the league away with points. McDavid was hurt prior to the break, but again, he's going to be back. The Flames, they have some good defense. They might be a little bit deeper than the Oilers up front. They have Johnny Gaudreau, I know. A couple other really good players. I think they have what's his name? I forget his name. Um, which I think this is really a coin flip because the Flames choked last year, so you think they might be angry. Um, but then you have the Oilers with McDavid and Draisaitl. That's a brutal two-headed monster, but then they don't have a lot behind that. And then neither one's gonna have home ice advantage because fans won't exist.
Well, they'll exist, they'll just be watching from home.
Right, but they won't exist in the arena. Um, I think Edmonton would win, and then probably St. Louis.
Yeah, I would think, well, uh it's Vegas versus Winnipeg for the other series.
Yeah, I picked Vegas already.
Oh, you did? Oh, and then uh you think Vegas is going to beat Edmonton, you think? Because that would be the Pacific Final. I would
Yeah,
say. I was going to say. I certainly think Vegas over Edmonton. I do think that the Oilers win as long as Connor McDavid produces and remains healthy. If he goes down, I'd probably give this to Calgary. But
agreed.
at the end of the day, I think McDavid's just going to make too much of an impact, uh, and they'll go through into the second round. And then I think the Knights will beat them because I just think they're hungry. Of course, they the first season in existence they lost in a cup final. Then they came back to the playoffs in their second season, and they arguably, well, maybe not even arguably, got cheated out of a victory. Of course, with that major penalty in overtime there. I just think that they're just going to be hungrier and they're going to want it more than Edmonton. And that's ultimately why I think they're gonna, I'm kind of jumping the gun here, but gonna beat St. Louis in this hypothetical conference final. Uh, Chris, who do you got? Blues, Knights? What are you feeling?
That's tough. The Blues or the Knights? Probably the Knights, but barely.
Yeah, like I said, I think these two teams are even on paper, but the Knights have more heart because of the past 2 years, and they're going to be the ones to face Boston in this hypothetical Stanley Cup final. Boston, Vegas. In this hypothetical Stanley Cup final, Boston looking for their first title since 2011, looking to avenge their loss in last year at the hands of the Blues, uh, versus Vegas, a team that we already said made the finals 2 years ago and lost. So this is a battle of the two previous Stanley Cup final losers. Who will triumph?
I have to go with it in this hypothetical scenario, Boston. I have to
Ooh.
go Boston.
Yeah, because both teams will be hungry in terms of that fortitude deep down. Of course, Boston lost in Game 7 a year ago. Vegas lost a heartbreaking Game 7 a year ago, not in the finals. Lost the finals 2 years ago. Uh, yeah, I'd have to go Boston as well.
I think Boston has a little bit more offense than Vegas does.
Yes, and while Vegas does have a solid Marc-Andre Fleury, uh, Sukaras can hang pretty well as well.
I was gonna say, I don't think Vegas has a goaltender advantage. I think they canceled themselves out. Defensively, I think Boston's probably a little better with McAvoy, Chara, and those boys. So, yeah, I just think Boston's a better team.
So there you have it. Our hypothetical Stanley Cup champions in a universe where the regular season does not resume, the playoffs start, and there are no fans. Your 2020 Stanley Cup champions, as predicted by the Pittsburgh Sportscast, the Boston Bruins. So with that, that will just about do it for episode number 2 of the Pittsburgh Sportscast. Uh, we're going to be taking a day off tomorrow, but we'll be back with you again on Friday, where we'll be talking all things Pittsburgh Pirates baseball. Uh, thank
Just
you
be prepared
guys.
for rants, guys. Just be prepared for rants. That's all I'm saying.
Well, it's the Pirates, Chris. There's bound to be rants somewhere.
Indeed.
All right. So until then, thank you guys for listening. We're glad we could provide a bit of a distraction, and we're glad that we could bring you some Pittsburgh sports talk in a time where there are no sports. Uh, Again, be sure to follow us on all of our social media platforms. Still working on Facebook and Instagram, but we do have Twitter at PGH Sportscast. You can tweet us questions or comments. Who knows? We might even answer them on the air. You could also email your questions to us at Pittsburgh Sports Podcast at gmail.com. And if you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to like, share, subscribe, click that notification bell if I am going to be cliche about it, and comment your questions and comments below. But until then, I'm Ryan,
And I'm Chris.
and we'll see you next time on the Pittsburgh Sports Cast. So long.